Good evening, welcome. Tonight we are here for the second public hearing on the budgets presented by the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education. They are the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025, which will begin on July 1, 2024. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is behind me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm Lisa Hevner, Chair of the Board of Finance, and I wanted to introduce and thank members of the Board of Finance. We have Art Wallace, Bird Health Fund, Art House. Mike Doyle will be joining us online, and Todd Burke is en route. We wanted to extend our sincere thanks to members of the Board of Selectmen and Education, Director of Finance, Amy Merriweather, Director of the Budget, Melissa Appleby, Town Manager Mark Nelson, Tom Fitzgerald, Superintendent of Schools Matthew Curtis, Town and School staff, Board and Commission members, and of course citizens and stakeholders who have worked to contribute to this year's budget. I'll begin tonight's hearing with a brief Board of Finance overview of the budget process, and we'll then hear from citizens. Citizens will have an opportunity to speak for 3 minutes. If you have more that you want to say, you can speak again after everyone has had an opportunity to speak first. Before we begin, I did want to address a rumor that some have reported that has been circulating, and to clarify, there has been no discussion or suggestion by the Board of Finance that the Flower Bridge should be torn down. This is not in any way an option under consideration, so I just want to clarify that before we begin public audience. We'll be voting on the capital plan later that does include additional dollars for the Flower Bridge, in addition to what was approved previously by voters, but there's no consideration to destroy the Flower Bridge, so I just want to take that off the table. So we will begin with the presentation. Tonight is the second Board of Finance public hearing on the Board of Education and Board of Selectmen proposed budgets for fiscal year 2025. The budgets call for $5.5 million in new spending for a total budget of $123,462,913. This represents a tax increase of 6.35%, inclusive of the fire district mill rate of 1.05 mills. The budget is a work in progress, and these numbers are not final. The budget must be approved by the Board of Finance and then the public at referendum. For those who missed this from the last public hearing, our town budget is like a three-legged stool. The Board of Education provides our children with high-quality education programs for which Simsbury is known. The Board of Selectmen delivers public safety, sound infrastructure, a quality of life that includes beautiful parks and open spaces, the library, senior center, recreation, and other key services. The budget reflects a combination of expenses we are legally obligated to fund, which we call mandates, and the costs of what the public needs and wants. But it's all made possible by the taxes we pay. And it only works if we keep all three legs of the stool in balance. The town and schools can't offer more than what our residents are able and willing to afford. Collectively, all of us try to respond to citizen preferences while controlling expenses as much as possible. And therein lies the challenge of local government. The budget is an iterative process that changes between December and April as the boards review new information and hear from members of the public and staff about priorities and concerns. We began the process in December with the Board of Finance initial guidance for a tax increase not to exceed 3.2%, consistent with the 3.2% rate of inflation and the 3.2% Social Security cost of living adjustment seniors will receive. The COLA serves as a measure of what our residents living on a fixed income can afford to spend. In February and March, Town and Education Management evaluated fixed costs and priorities for their work, resulting in recommendations to the Board of Selectmen and Education. Those budgets would have required a 7.44% tax increase to fund. Next, the Boards of Selectmen and Education weighed management's recommendations and affordability considerations to to make their recommendations to the Board of Finance, which we are considering tonight. Those budgets which are proposed tonight by the Boards of Selectmen and Education would result in a tax increase of 6.35%. After the public hearing, the Board of Finance will likely approve its budget to recommend to referendum. The Board of Finance has indicated a strong preference to keep the tax increase below 5%, and we have evaluated the use of reserves and other financial mechanisms to attain that outcome. To attain its goal of a tax increase not to exceed 5%, the Board of Finance, working with the Finance Director and the Budget Director, is considering adjustments to the budgets that include delayed borrowing, the use of the bond premium the town receives to offset debt service costs, use of reserves, limiting future bonding to no more than $10 million every 2 years, about $5 million every year, operating and other budgetary adjustments to accomplish this goal. During the budget process, the Board of Finance considers not just the current budget, but also considers projections in the out years. To lessen tax increases in the out years, the Board of Finance is planning to take steps this year using reserves to offset debt service payments and lower the mill rate. This slide shows the Finance Director's analysis of how the town might use capital reserves and delayed borrowing to reduce debt service and therefore the mill rate this year and in future years. You'll see in year 1, there's no use of reserves, but by delaying going out to bond, we will save over $800,000 and therefore reduce the mill rate. In year 2, 3, and 4, years 2 and 3 and 4, we will use reserves and the bond premium. Next year, we will be using $1 million in the bond premium and $300,000 in reserves. Fiscal year 27, $700,000 in reserves. In the fiscal year 2028, $300,000 in reserves. And by 2029, no use of reserves. We have, you can see we will have stabilized debt service payments. We were going to go from 8.9, now we're at about 8 million. Next year we're supposed to go to 10 million, now we're at 8.2. So we've reduced debt service. By reducing debt service, we have reduced the mill rate in the out years. Capital reserves is meant to pay for capital projects. So paying for debt service on capital projects is an acceptable and a responsible use of capital reserves and consistent with town policy. Tonight you're going to hear a series of very long motions. The packet is very long. And this slide summarizes the motions that we'll be making. I won't go into them because they're technical, but they involve increasing, decreasing the operating budget, use of reserves, assigning dollars, authorizing the transfer of the bond premium to capital reserves, and assigning capital reserves in the out years will be coming later on. The important point to make about the changes that the Board of Finance is considering is that it keeps Simsbury's fiscal condition strong and better positioned for the future. We will maintain general fund reserves between 15 to 17%, as recommended by bonding agencies and best practices. We will fully fund all our legal obligations, leave sufficient and reasonable capital reserves to cover any unanticipated emergencies. We will be replenishing capital reserves for use in fiscal year 2026 so that we can maintain our investment in capital assets. We will better stabilize debt service in the out years. It anticipates and plans for potential health insurance fiscal cliff in 2026. And it uses general fund reserves for mill rate stabilization to accommodate the delayed state reimbursement of the motor vehicle tax, which will result in no fiscal cliff the following year. Another thing we keep in mind when we evaluate the proposed budgets is how Simsbury's mill rate compares with those in neighboring towns. The relationship between property taxes and business investment is a primary concern. For this reason, we evaluate how the proposed budgets in Simsbury compare with our neighboring towns. As described by municipal budgeting expert Robert Bland, higher property taxes diminish economic growth and encourage out-migration of households and businesses. Over the long term, towns with higher than average property tax burdens have lower property values. Every business has a critical point in which differences in tax rates among local governments become significant to its locational decisions. You can see here that Simsbury is a little high in terms of mill rates, but within the norm of tax increases as compared to our neighbors. After the Board of Finance approves a budget for referendum, it's the voters who have the final say as to whether the town's spending plan strikes the right balance. We look forward to hearing from you tonight. And with that, we'll begin public hearing. Art, could you pass me the list of folks who signed up to speak? For folks who haven't signed up, we'll take people from the audience afterwards, so not to worry. We'll start with Dave Ryan. Dave, if you could just state your name and address for the public.
David Ryan, 21 Sledge Road.
3 minutes.
West Simsbury. Dave Ryan, 20 West Sledge Road, West Simsbury. Since 2008, I've been involved with the Performing Arts Center because I think it's a valuable component of Simsbury's quality of life. And one thing about the proposal tonight for to fund the Simsbury's expansion, Simsbury Performing Arts Center expansion. Number one, it will help keep the Talcott Mountain Music Festival here in Simsbury, which I think is a really important thing. And secondly, it should be noted while our procedures make us add up all the money involved, it's a $2.7 million project, but the town is committing under this vote to commit only $500,000. And when you take a $2.7 million capital asset and get it for $500,000, I think that's a bargain and you ought to approve it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. We have next. I hope I'm Lynn Bruno. Do I have that right?
Okay. My name is Lynn Bruno, and I'm a resident of 43 Blue Ridge Drive in Weetog. First of all, I would like to thank the Board of Finance for all of the hard work that you have done. I can't balance my own home budget, and I give you a lot of credit. And as a longtime Simsbury Weetog resident and a taxpayer, I have watched the old Drake Hill Flower Bridge grow from a small town novelty into a local, state, and regional icon because of the visionary efforts of a small group of Simsbury residents whose original idea has been far exceeded by the current membership. Countless volunteer hours, non-paid volunteer hours, have gone into the planning, implementation, maintenance, publicity, fundraising, and sharing in the beauty of this bridge and the connecting park. Although owned by the town, citizens of Simsbury and some surrounding towns have eagerly welcomed visitors from near and far, including senior citizen field trips, weddings, graduations, engagements, yoga classes, prom pictures, concerts, and many other activities. Featured in countless advertising media and perhaps many wedding albums, the bridge has drawn attention to our local businesses since it is accessible to everyone 12 months out of the year, not just in the summertime. With aging, the bridge is now in desperate need of rehabilitation, which cannot be put off much longer. If the bridge continues to deteriorate, it will be declared unsafe and may deem unusable, and we will lose a great treasure. I urge all of our town officials and citizens to approve in the referendum to allot the supplemental funds to complete this endeavor. Our town idol deserves our best and your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And we have Dave Bush next. Is Dave here? Oh, there we go.
Good evening, all. David Bush, 4 Catherine Lane, Chairman of Park and Rec is the hat I'm wearing now. So I'm back here for the second time because of the fact that I'm a little surprised that funding of a design of $150,000 for a splash pad has been a real topic of conversation. We got $2.1 million for an irrigation system that goes through. We have other projects that we do that are $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. This is not a situation where this is a want versus a need. How do we know that? We know that because you folks authorized the money to be spent for a master plan that in 2020 deemed a high priority that we deal with the aging pool and consider a splash pad as a much more effective cost alternative. We spend about $93,000 a year right now on the pool, but we need the pool for now because it's absolutely key to a program that Tom runs that generates $220,000 a year, which is called Camp Stuff to Do. So without some kind of aquatic option, that camp is at risk. That is a revenue generator. If we go forward with a splash pad, we have a situation where we go from 7 or 8 lifeguards down to 1, a cost savings. We spend $10,000 losing water at the pool now. That won't happen with a splash pad. This is not a want. This is a need that needs to be addressed from the standpoint of you asked us as a board and commission plan and budget. We did. We planned. We got a master plan. This is identified in the master plan. We've put it in the budget. We've done what we need to do. The Board of Selectmen recognizes that we've done what we needed to do when they consider this to be a project that should be funded, and they support the fact this project move forward. The last element of this is it isn't just about a splash pad. It's a situation where part of this project is to renovate the bathrooms there. And as we all know, we have 3 separate ball fields. We have a skate park. All of these are unsupported by any kind of decent restroom facilities. So when you consider this $150,000, considering it's not just a splash pad, it is an upgrade, a needed upgrade to your recreational facility where hundreds and hundreds of residents and their kids use it. So I simply ask you, this is something that was thoughtful. This wasn't a wish. This was something that was recognized, and I ask that you support it in this year's budget, even though I recognize we have financial constraints. This should be left in the budget as it was originally intended to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Dornberg? Is Jeff here? Yeah.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Jeff Dornenberg, and I'm at 225 Old Farms Road here in Simsbury. I am also associated with the Simsbury Meadows Performing Arts Center. I went to a state tourism show that they had at the Bushnell a little while ago, and they pointed out something that's very important to us, and the Flower Bridge people would want to take note of this, is that for a generation, when businesses changed locations, they changed location because they wanted low taxes and they wanted low cost of doing business. And for a generation, Connecticut had people migrating out of the state. The new way of looking for business, and they have the data to back this up, is a qualified workforce and quality of life. That changes everything. And now, for the first time in a long time, post-COVID, Connecticut has a growing population again. Our Performing Arts Center is very important to the quality of life here in Simsbury. 30,000 people plus go through there a year, many from out of town, but mostly from people from Simsbury tend to use it. We run this as a nonprofit, right? So that we have 3 full-time people, a half-time person, and an army of part-time people that come in the summer, some college help, right? This would all be on the town's budget if the town tried to do this, if the town wanted to do it on its own. And plus, we take risks. If we want to bring in a $40,000 band to play on the stage, it's going to cost us, we're taking a $75,000 to $100,000 risk on that because we're an outdoor venue. I would say also that, much to Dave's point, this is the money that we're talking about tonight. This is the cost of the building. This is the money that we're talking about tonight. You should also know that this other amount of money just above it, this other little bit, the town of Simsbury committed a long time ago for outdoor bathrooms that serve the dog park, that serve the Rotary playground down there, that serve the bike path. Okay? The rest of this is state of Connecticut and private funds. So we're not talking about a big piece of the pie here, but it's an important piece of the pie, because if we can get phase 2 done, that we've been talking about for, I don't know, a dozen years, it makes it easier for us to do, it lowers our cost of doing business, it makes it easier for us to change out, especially in July when the symphony's here, we can change out and have other entertainment on the stage at the same time. There's other bands that won't come in because they look at our facility and say, this is a band shell, they're not going to come in. It helps us do a better job. Our job is making people have fun. That, at the end of the day, is the reason that you want to approve this, because people have a lot of fun down there, and that's what we're in the business of. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for all your hard work on this. I know this isn't fun. It's a hard year.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, that's all I have on my list, so if there are people from the audience who'd like to speak, Joan? And if you could please state your address.
Joan Code, 26 Lipton Drive. As a Simsbury resident over the years, I've witnessed many budgets that have been approved by the taxpayers. To my knowledge, there was only one budget rejected by the taxpayers associated with the Board of Education. This year is a very difficult one, as the grant list has not increased as it has over the years, and new projects have been added. Using the general fund as a slush fund to support expenditures we cannot afford in the future will only kick the can down the road, adding more budget increases that are not sustainable. Simsbury does not have large corporations coming to town, placing the tax burden on the homeowners. The Board of Education should be able to manage staff with fewer employees. Many pupil support services do not affect the core learning of the students. Each student has pupil support services with psychologists, social workers, paraprofessionals, etc., under the direction of a supervisor and staff. I have included the link to support services staff on my Twitter page, or Twitter at Joan Co. and Simsbury Patch. It has become one of the drivers of an increase in the Board of Education budget. The Board of Finance should challenge the need of all these support services in our schools and ask for a reduction in staff to reduce the budget. Increased taxes year after year places a strain on all taxpayers. Many restaurants are now being burdened with higher personnel costs and escalation of food prices and higher rents. All this will be passed on to the consumer, who will reject this escalation in costs and go to restaurants fewer times, finally shuttering the businesses. The homeowner will have the burden of supporting a budget that escalates, a burden on their fixed income. Economic development will be unattainable with higher taxes. All the renters in town will have increase in rents, and they can no longer afford, leaving a glut of empty apartments. This leads to many tax appeals, furthering the impact on the taxes. The lowest stock market values should be an indicator of the financial environment. Budgets have consequences, and the Board of Finance should continue to review the expenditures for reduction and cost-saving ways to eliminate the continued burden on the taxpayers. The Board of Finance should review all expenditures to lower the tax burden from 6.5% that should be rejected by the taxpayers. All of my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch and Twitter at Joan Co. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Joan. Is there anyone else from the audience who'd like to speak?
A quick question.
No questions right now. Is there anyone else from the audience who'd like to speak?
Yes.
Dave.
Good evening. My name is David Richmond. I live at 52 Wood Duck Lane in Terriffill. I own Talcott Mountain Self-Storage on the Avon Simsbury line in Weetag. I own 30 Winthrop Street over in Terriffill, and I own 760 Hot Meadow Street right across the street. In total, as I added this up today, I came up to $149,000 a year is what my companies contribute to Simsbury's taxes. Thinking about the Flower Bridge and watching it deteriorate over all these years, I do not believe this is the time, and in this economy, it's the time to start spending the $7 million to replace the Flower Bridge. Somehow it was mismanaged and let to deteriorate over all the years, where if it knew 5 years ago it needed this, it could have been done for a lot less. So I'm asking that we review this and maybe rebuild it in stages and/or look to the community here and outside of here to do a fundraiser and raise the money to replace the bridge. Not using my tax dollars to do it because for some reason we have other obligations that we should be looking at before we replace the bridge. And I love the bridge, but this is not the time. The other thing is to start thinking about increasing the grand list. There was a lot of opportunities where we had to, new developments that were unfortunately voted down, and there's been a new burden of legal costs where the town's been sued by Vessel, and now the town is being sued by the Silverman Group. So I want to make sure that's in your number because those are costs that we haven't had in the past. With our tenants, I think I have 19 tenants. With COVID, we kept all our rents fixed. We didn't think it was the time to raise the rents, even though insurance costs were going up. If anyone wants to see our electric bill, our gas bill, everything goes up, plowing, everything goes up. So if our taxes go up, normally a person in the real estate business is going to pass that on. We passed on this year, first time in 3 years, a 3% increase to our tenants, and their response was, I'm going to move back home for $30 a month. So you have to look at who we're affecting, and it's not, yes, it's me, but it's my tenants, because any tenant that's on a triple net lease, this increase in taxes is going to go right to them, and they're going to have to pay it. So that's another thing. Our operational costs are up. Fuel is up. So to have our taxes go up on the buildings at this time and in this economy is not a good thing. It just, to us, is not a good time to do it. The other is there are ways, and there's community people, and one thing I would say is, the people that are in the bridge program, why aren't they meeting with the business owners? Why aren't they reaching out to us to start thinking outside the box or getting different estimates to repair? So I asked them to think of us, and I ask you not to include the bridge replacement in this year's budget. Thank you.
We do not take questions during public audience, but during our discussion, we may address issues that come up. But if someone does have a question, they can address the board through public audience, and we will glad to hear questions. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at public audience? I'll ask again. Is Lori?
I am Lori Boyko from 15 Oakhurst Road. I didn't originally have this written down, but wow, I am blown away by the incredible disparity between what residents in town define as quality of life. I guess when you have money, you don't realize that being able to feed your family and heat your home takes precedence. It's no secret to anyone at this point that I'm here to advocate for lower overall expenditures. I expect that many people assume I'm saying this to keep my taxes low no matter what. And that's partially true. But we, like many other towns, are caught in a never-ending tug of war between all of the amazing things this town offers and the fact that the only way we pay for them is with the contributions of all of our hard-earned dollars. For many in this town, that's a non-issue. They literally make so much money that their taxes are really nominal and they can operate their homes with almost no budgeting. But there's a huge wealth gap here, and there are many more families who are forced to fork over 10% or more of their entire gross annual pay just to pay property taxes on homes like a small 3-bedroom Cape. For them, this is entirely unsustainable into the future and undoable in this economic environment. To require someone to pay more than they already are in taxes to fund a study for a splash pad, never mind the water feature itself, in a town that will still have 4 swimming pools, is unconscionable. Simsbury Farms has a kiddie wading pool, a children's pool that's 3 feet deep everywhere in it, a full-size swimming and lap pool, and a diving pool. To claim a splash pad is a need to replace Memorial Pool for summer campers is like saying I need a hot tub in my backyard when I can't afford to replace the roof. The reasons parents use Central School Summer Camp for its water feature is for the swimming lessons, not the ability to just get wet. This town has 4,100 students in our schools and already spends over 70% of our budget on them, on 16% of the population. Half of them are in 7th grade or higher, so a splash pad would serve about 2,000 people in town max or less. Less than 10% of the population. How much of our tax dollars should be directly attributed entirely to the children? When is enough enough? I spoke to a friend before I walked in here who was telling me about her job situation. Her comment to me was, and I quote, "I've learned a lot this year about how to live with only what is absolutely necessary. An addition to a performing arts center that I can't afford to go to isn't necessary. I can't afford to put flowers in my own flower pots, much less on the flower bridge." End quote. In years when people can't afford their own expenses, much less a tax increase, there should be a tax cut, not just a lower increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Is there anyone else who would like to speak? We do not take questions from the audience, but if you'd like to address the board, you're welcome to come up and speak during public audience. We'd be happy to take it in that situation.
I wasn't gonna, but I guess I gotta get up and say something.
Okay. Nord.
Not very well planned or organized, I apologize for that, but a couple thoughts are, I agree, Laurie, not everybody.
So could you identify yourself?
Nord Christensen, 35 West Mountain Road. I own and manage Simsbury Square. I have 70 commercial and residential tenants. I pay nearly 3 times what David Richmond pays in taxes. I'm not happy about a 6% increase in taxes either. I have tenants that I have absolutely no choice. I haven't gone up on their rents in COVID. I have absolutely no choice at this point but to go up and go up dramatically because of past tax increases, reevaluations, and everything else tied with it. And also, I wasn't allowed to present 3 of my properties on the reval. Actually had to sue the town. Really wanted to do that, sue myself. There are a lot of people in this town that can't afford increases like that. There are a lot of people that can just, like myself, who I'm going to just have to pass on that increase to my tenants. I agree with some of the statements regarding the Flower Bridge. Great project. Love it. It's wonderful. But can't we do it in stages? Why wasn't some of this done over the last 10 years? Do we really need to drop nearly $3 million on it all in one chunk? I can't do that at my own house. I can't just say, geez, I want to do this and this and this and this. I have to pick and choose what I do each year, how many projects I do. Why do we have to do everything at once? Doesn't make any sense to me. Again, not picking on the Flower Bridge or the Performing Arts Center. Don't really know what else to say. Just, thanks.
Okay, I'll open it up for one last time. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Go ahead. And I'll make sure to get you next.
I'm Deborah McElhenney. I live at 15 Riverside Road, and I grew up at 45 Westledge Road, so I am a forever resident of Simsbury. My concern is about the Flower Bridge. We've spoken about what an icon it is for Simsbury. It's a wonderful venue. I do have a question, though, just some clarification on the funding. And this could all be wrong, that's why I'm asking for clarification. I've heard that there is $1.5 million already set aside for working on the bridge, but if this goes forward to the referendum, the bridge project will be a line item, and I don't know how much funding is being asked for that at this point. So I just wanted, and I understand that if it doesn't get voted through, that we lose the money that's already apparently been set aside. So if there's any clarification on that, I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you. During discussions, we'll
Okay,
follow up.
great, thank you.
Okay.
I'm Tom Coangelo, 16 Country Club Drive. I had no intention of being up here today. I just wanted to ask a simple question. But I'm going to ask a question and make a statement after that. Has there been an independent citizen committee or group to review and scrub the proposal? That's what you do with most budgets, big budgets. No?
We don't respond during public
Okay.
hearing, but
This is just a statement. It has nothing to do with going on here. But a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go out to Torrington and see our Congresswoman and Congressman Larson address the senior citizens out there, trying to drum up support for a bill they wanted to pass to provide more money to senior citizens via Social Security and Medicare and other things. I had suggested that before doing that, maybe it wasn't necessary, that we go back and start getting our government back in order and cutting all of the extraneous costs and expenditures that we don't need, are totally unwarranted. And I suppose our cost of living would go down, and that Social Security increase would not be needed. Matter of fact, people would come out far ahead. Well, that wasn't met with much support from our two Congress people. It was a matter of fact, I don't know what I'm talking about, and we just can't do that because you don't understand. We have to get money in the economy. I said, well, you know, you could look at many of the things that I've mentioned, and oh, by the way, take a look at this one portion of Obamacare, which is responsible for the majority of doubling the costs in the medical system. It's sacrosanct. We can't touch it. And then within a couple of minutes, she stormed out the door. And Congressman Larson was there to take the rest of the meeting. That got me going because I'm a pretty laid-back guy. And when I see stuff like that, I get upset. So anyway, we want to get to the bottom of the issue, solve the problem, get it done any way we can. And it just seems to me, I'd like to see an independent group look at the budget, scrub it, and then bring their recommendations to you and ultimately to the citizens. That's what I would like to see. Sorry for taking up too much time.
no, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on the budget? You guys help me see if we will take second. Okay, is there anyone who would like to speak again on the budget? And again, we'll limit it to 3 minutes and then
I am Lori Boyko from 15 Oakhurst Road still. I just have a couple of quick data points. I would like to reiterate, because we have a bigger crowd here than we did last year, or a few weeks ago, that our schools have 22 administrators. Every single one of them is making in excess of $150,000 a year, all 22 of them, when half of the households in town make less than $140,000, often with not one, but two wage earners. I've been looking at a lot of data points. Henry James has 3 security guards and 1 police officer SRO. The high school, much to my shock, has 5 security guards, 1 director of security who's a 25-year retired Simsbury police officer, and a police officer SRO, for a total of 6 security guards plus a police officer for about 1,000 students. I also have a single family, just one small rental property. I haven't raised the rent in 4 years because I'm afraid to lose the tenant. I'd rather lose some income from the tax erosion than lose the total rent. But I'm getting to the point where I'm going to have to raise the rent too. And lastly, there's some funny little things in the budget, like the library room rental revenue. In 2022, they budgeted $613 in revenue. Actual revenue was 0. In 2023, they budgeted $700 in revenue. Actual revenue was 0. In 2024, they budgeted $800 in revenue. Actual revenue is 0. They're now budgeting $1,400 in revenue for 2025. I would really love to be able to do that in my sales projections. A 75% increase from last year's budget, but they haven't had any revenue since 2022. I know those numbers are absolutely meaningless, other than the fact that I have to wonder if that's what they're doing with their revenue budgeting. There's several $1 million in our library budget, and I don't know how accurate those numbers are if they can't even project $1,000 in revenue when there's been none for 4 years. Lastly, every new property, building, and structure that we add to this town becomes a future maintenance, possibly debt, continuous improvement, and funding cost.
Thanks, Laurie. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Joan?
Unscripted.
Uh-oh.
I would just like to talk about the splash pad, which I am in favor of. I think it's a good idea. But since I checked back a while ago, and since 2010, we have discussed closing the memorial pool. And in all of the studies, which are piled high, which we don't need $150,000 for, is notation of a splash pad, other ideas. But we have studied this thing to death. We don't need more money. My suggestion is to decide we want the splash pad. Why don't we put out an RFP and let the person who's going to produce it tell us how much it's going to cost? Let's work in reverse. So we could get the cost. It costs us nothing. We put it out. This is what we want. These are the parameters. This is how we're going to do it. We have it here. Tell us what it's going to cost. And we don't have to do it. But we got numbers if people are interested. So I think we're going about this as the wrong thing. We study and study and study. If anybody goes to the archives, they can find a study that justifies whatever they're talking about. We have done it. So studies don't work. We already have all the information. Just do it, and do it the most inexpensive way. I think an RFP would be a perfect way to get to the conclusion that if we need it and it's within our limits, then we could do it. But this business of throwing money at an issue is totally idiotic, in my opinion. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. All right, last call. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? One last call? Okay.
Sharon Byron, I presently reside with my brother up at 17 Crestview Road. This library that you stand in today and you sit in today was a vision back in 1986, 1982, when my children were small, and we needed a multimedia center. It took a ton of volunteers and all the clubs in town to make this vision a reality. I have served for past 10 years as a volunteer for Talcott Mountain. I'd say 1996, actually, I started with Talcott Mountain Music Festival to support that. There are, as Joan says, our best recorder and historian in the town, splash pads in Denver and everything. We template everything today. There are ways to think outside the box and get these things done cost effectively, efficiently, using artificial intelligence, using the computers that do all the design. These things are reality. They used to sound like big projects. Now you can see 15 different sides. You can say, I'd like to have a splash pad, as Joan said, just like one in Denver that my kids get to enjoy. And I got out there and I enjoyed it with my grandson when I was there. So these things are all over, and our kids are leaving. My kids are in Seattle now, Denver, North Carolina. They walk to a place, they can bicycle to a place from Simsbury, like Simsbury Farms. So I want everybody to think outside the box. Get this budget done. Lisa does a phenomenal job. She knows the town. And we got to all pull together. We all saw the eclipse together, the solar eclipse together. That was our pull-together moment. UConn, the nation, right? My two UConn grads, they're doing great stuff out in Denver and Seattle. Great programs. Education in Simsbury was the structure that started them. And when my kids did Montessori school, we expanded it. We have Montessori school here in Simsbury. We have another huge one in Avon now. So we are the nucleus of great talent. We have great minds in this town, and we have a ton of senior citizens with great minds that are not really being supported as they should be. This is basically our senior center here, because we just can't seem to get one done. So look at those line items, and I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank all the hard work that all our volunteers do, and I want our businessmen to encourage more volunteers to come in here and to work with us. Because when we first started with the library, wrote a letter to Harry Gray, because I was working for United Technologies, and I said, would you please help us build a library? And I got a letter back from Harry to say that we'll do 2 for 1. Apparently we didn't collect on that at the time, but
Sharon.
I will stop. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm very passionate about this town, and I think we have the talent to do great things, performing arts, everything. Build it, and they will come. Notre Dame.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay. I think we're done with public audience. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Okay, seeing none, we will close public audience. Melissa, could you give us a clarification on the funding of the Flower Bridge and how that works?
Certainly. So the Flower Bridge project has been, we've already had 2 appropriations for the Flower Bridge, one in fiscal year 23 in the amount of $280,000 for the design, one in the amount of about $1.9 million, and that was bond funded. That was a fiscal year 24 appropriation. And so what we're asking for fiscal year 25 is the supplemental amount of $495,000. The aggregate appropriation is the 2.764 that you're seeing referenced. The reason we are showing the total amount is because with this supplemental appropriation, it's going to push it above the threshold that we have written into our charter for a project being approved at referendum. So it's over a certain amount, which is 2% of the budget. So The question on the ballot, should it be advanced to the referendum, would be phrased in such a way that you'd be approving or not approving the additional $495,000. But the question will also reference the total cost of the project, which is the 2.7.
Melissa, if the project were to fail at referendum, the prior approvals would stay.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Another question that we had during the hearing that I'll just address is in terms of the process. Elected representatives are elected to review the budgets in consultation with professional staff. So that begins with the Board of Selectmen reviewing the town budget. The Board of Education has 8 members reviewing the Board of Education budget. It is also reviewed by the 6 members of the Board of Finance, who, if you've been watching our meetings, know we get fairly in-depth and look at the numbers very carefully. Our staff has been very responsive to questions we ask. Sometimes we ask them in public, but they get a series of emails periodically asking for additional information. All throughout the process, there's the opportunity for the public to give feedback. So multiple opportunities for the public to review the budgets, to give feedback, and to contribute. And I just want to say how grateful we are that all of you are here today. It really makes my heart sing to see so many people share their thoughts and priorities for the town. The other thing I'll say is that I've had the opportunity, I've been doing this for a while, as you know, and everyone I've worked with has the best interests of the town at heart. And I can say that with complete confidence and sincerity. So we don't always agree, and the funding, like all towns in America, there are less resources available for the amount we want to spend, and that involves prioritization. So what might be priority for one individual, for one department, may not be the priority for the organization as a whole. We look at it in toto. What can we afford? What can our residents afford? How much resources are there? And then within that, what do we need to fund first? And like a family, if the roof is leaking, you fix the leak first, right? Before you do something new. It's really no different than a budget. Now, we may disagree as to what to fund first, and there will be discussion on that tonight, but everyone I have ever met, and I've been doing this for 15 years, has always put the best interests of the town first. And that's what makes our community great, even though we don't always agree what that is. But eventually we reach some sort of conclusion, we come up with a budget, we hope the citizens support it. If they don't support it, they have the right to vote no, because at the end of the day, it's the public's dollars, and it's how they want to spend it. And we try to listen to what you have to say to meet the long-term fiscal needs of the town as we do it. So we look at just not the current year, but the out years, make sure we're maintaining the fiscal health of the town. So it's a complicated process, but it's also a really beautiful example of democracy at work. And it only works because all of you contribute to it. It's your budget, and we try to do what you want, balancing the needs and wants of the town. So thank you for participating in this. It really means a lot. Also, it's really nice to see y'all. I haven't seen some of you in a while, so thank you for coming. I did want to give opportunities of this board to see if there's, based on what they heard, whether there's any additional information they need at this point, or whether there are any comments they want to make before we start budget deliberations. Bert. Were you going to say something? No. Okay. All right. So I know everybody is looking forward to the budget discussion, but we are first going to do the quarterly budget status report. The reason why we do a quarterly budget status report of the current year is it shows us trends, deficiencies, issues that we need to take into account for the current year. So we'll ask Amy to walk us through where we are. Part of our plan for the future does involve some savings that we anticipate from this year, so we review what we think those savings will be. And we'll ask Amy to walk us through it. It is a little complicated, but she's highlighted some of the key numbers, and some of these numbers will then sort of impact the decisions we're making. Amy.
Okay, starting off with our general fund on the revenue side. As Lisa just noted, I have some numbers that are highlighted here, which get us to the majority of our bottom line surplus. So if we take a look at the end of March 31st, we're at about $119 million in revenues to date. We are just shy of budget, about 2.4 million, but the column that you're really interested in is where we're going to end up at the end of fiscal year 24. So for those of you that have a packet, this is page 4. I am anticipating to have general fund revenues at about 125 million. So this will be a surplus to the revenues of just shy of 3.4 million. What gets us there? These highlighted items. You'll see under the tax department, we have about 566,000 surplus of budget. And this is because of our budgeted tax collection rate at 98.5%. This is something we anticipate every year. You hear about it every quarterly. Moving down to the finance department, we have about 2 million in excess for our investment income, about 3.1 total. This is related to very conservative budgets during the year when interest rates pretty much went up very, very quickly. We were able to realize some of that surplus to the tune of about 2 million for this year. If we go down to the town manager's office, we had some unanticipated municipal revenue sharing money from the state of Connecticut related to their sales tax revenue, and then an unanticipated increase related to our pilot payment for about 700,000. And then lastly, under the Board of Education, we had an increased number of tuition students between last year, this year, and hopefully continuing into next year, which is about $225,000 surplus to the budget. This also includes rental income related to the use of our school buildings. Coming out of COVID, that revenue has continuously creeping up year over year as we kind of return to normal. So for the revenue side, just to summarize, just shy of like 3.4 million surplus of budget.
Amy, before you go on, can you go back to the top? When we look at the 2 million excess interest investment income, you will see when we take our budget motions, we will be adjusting the interest investment income to increase that based on this number, based on anticipated interest investment returns that we expect for 2025. The 700,000 was unanticipated municipal revenue sharing program. Amy did reach out to OPM, Office of Policy and Management for the state that delivers this grant to us to see if this was a number we could budget. We were told by Martin Heft, and it's still the case, that that is not a certain number. It should not be budgeted, so that will not be budgeted this year. It was considered a windfall. We're happy to have it. What happens to money like that? It goes into capital reserves and then pays for capital investment in the future. But unfortunately, we are unable to budget for that. The interest for the Board of Ed, some of the tuition income that you saw excess, that will be budgeted in the fiscal year 2025. So you will start to see those things be incorporated in the following year's budget. Okay, Amy?
Moving on to expenditures. Again, as of March 31st, we're at about just shy of $88 million in expenditures, 72% of the budget spent. And again, over here, this is the column you want to pay attention to, is where we're projected to be at the end of the fiscal year. So about 120,775,000 in expenditures, which is a coming in under budget of about 922,000. Again, I highlighted some areas up here of where the savings is coming from. Most of it is staffing vacancies. I did a little summary down here, so I didn't have to run through all of them. But about 1.2 million is a combination of salaries and benefit savings. So we have salary savings due to staffing vacancies, then their corresponding benefits, and then we also had considerable savings in our pension annually required contribution amounts this year. Going back up to where we have the Board of Education, as previously reported, we anticipated to have a deficit related to special education, about 600,000 to 700,000. We think that we can get it down to about 500,000 right now, firmly. And then we are still in terms of looking at our grants and how we can kind of realign those, and some other offsets, including a spending freeze. We can likely get this down even further. But right now, just to be conservative, we have that $500,000 estimate in there as a deficit. So with the majority of those items, again, looking at being under budget of about $922,000. So if we take the revenues minus the expenditures, we're looking at an overall surplus of just shy of 4.3 million. To put this into context of our budget planning, when we did the out-year planning and we looked at our reserve balances, you may recall that I used a surplus, very conservative surplus of about 3.5 million. So we are very much to the good of that number.
One of the things for members of the public, you'll see what does that mean? Is that an overtax? It's not an overtax because that money now becomes a revenue source for funding a capital in the fiscal year 2026 budget. That money will be spent, and we'll go through. In my presentation, I went through some of the plan to use that to pay off debt service, and it will be used for capital projects in the future. If we did not have some of that surplus, we would just be budgeting it for the operating budget. So you can say, okay, we're not going to use that, but then you have to tax for it in the following year anyway, so it's a net neutral on that sense. Although we will try and tighten up those numbers, and you will see us tightening that up using the interest investment income assumption. Are there any questions from board members on these numbers that we're seeing? All right.
So Amy, just to be clear, so the difference, as much as this is a 4.3, was that how the math works there?
Mm-hmm.
4.3, 700 of it, is that what you're saying, is the actual good guy from the last conversation, or how should I think of it? Because it's not like it's a total of 4.3 that's a good guy from the last time we budgeted, or how should I think about that?
The good guy in the sense of the 3.5 to the 4.2?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my last set of projections were around that 4 million. I just used 3.5 in the event that they were to come down at some point.
Got it.
I'm still pretty good at the 4.2. I'm just, conservative in nature.
I'm just trying to clarify that it's not like we just found 4.3. Like we knew of a good chunk of this. It's the 700 that's
Correct.
Okay.
Just in terms of a perspective, all municipalities do have a surplus at the end. You think, okay, what is a reasonable amount? 4.3 sounds like a big number. It's really only 3.5% of the budget. If you think about what is considered reasonable, a lot of people haven't looked at this, but Massachusetts has. And they say you should aim to come in for between 3 and 5% of your budget as surplus. So it's within what is reasonable for Massachusetts. Although every state uses their own and every municipality, this is not an unreasonable number. And like I said, this money is not waste. It's not going to be, hooray, let's have a party. It's going to be used for needed expenses in capital in fiscal year 2026 and as part of our plan. But 4.3 sounds high, it's 3.5%. When you think about your own budgets, is that unreasonable? That's one way to look at it. Okay. You want to just walk us through very quickly, see if there's our quarterly report also includes special revenue funds, Simsbury Farms, sewer, residential properties, and capital projects. Do you have anything you want to highlight, or should I just open it up for questions on that?
Open it up for questions.
Are there any questions on the rest of the report? The report is online if members of the public want to look at it. But there's nothing of significance or variance there, is that correct?
Correct.
Are there any other questions on the quarterly report? Okay, we will then move on to budget motions, if folks are ready for that. Are we ready for that, folks? Melissa, do I need to close the public hearing before we do that? Or after?
I would do it after, just for some
Just in
reason you
case.
decide to go for a third.
Because there was a solar eclipse and you never know what might happen. Okay. What we have now is a series of motions. They are fairly complicated, but they're actually, and the reason why we do that is because we try and show transparency, what the changes we're making and why we're making those changes. The budget packet this year, and I do want to commend Melissa for pulling this together, does contain the line item budget, the capital budget, the special revenue budgets all in one place. In the past, you had to go to multiple places to find what the budget is we approved. It's all right here. So it will be posted in our minutes after the budget, so if anyone wants to double check. And these documents then become what the budget is. If there's any discrepancy, it's not what was in the town manager's budget or in the Board of Education budget, it's what's contained in this that will rule. You will see in here that there are also motions to approve the capital improvement plan, which are capital projects 250,000 or above. Those are dictated by corporate counsel, and they are based on what has been presented. Members of the public have had an opportunity to review that. Copies were made and distributed today, but they will also be posted as part of this packet as well. But they do coincide with discussions that we talked about in the past. On that, let me just get to. I do want to highlight a couple of things that we're going to be going through that are different. The CIP bond language on Simsbury Meadows has been updated to reflect the submission to DECD and shows that the project will also pay for the siding and the roof. So that was not included in the original document, but was intended to be included. Motions on the historic documents and town LoCIP funds are included for our board's consideration. In the past, there's been some discrepancy as to what needs to be approved for those documents because there's special revenue funds. So we're just going to go ahead and approve the total appropriations that's available for them so they can use them. Those are funded by fees and not taxes. And anything that's not spent will need to be reappropriated the following year, but it gives them the authority so that we don't have to have that conversation during the year. The motion for the splash pad does propose changing the funding source from capital bonding to the use of capital reserves as recommended by the first selectwoman and the town manager. In talking with the first selectman earlier today, there was a little update as to what it's being funded for. Is Wendy here? Wendy, can you just sort of update? It's a little different than what was discussed during the last meeting, public hearing, so if you could just update what it covers for the public.
Yeah, I'll go up there.
Have the newbies read it. Have the newbies read it.
So we discussed this last night because we did realize there was a little confusion. The study is really for the splash pad site. That is what was recommended by the consultant when they did the master plan. And it basically is really levels of the process of what would happen at the site with taking down the building, renovating the building, the bathrooms, potential for a snack bar. But it was really all around doing a site plan for a splash pad. Did not include other options like a skate park or a basketball court or a pickleball court. It was really just for the splash pad.
And then we did get an update from you as well. The document the Board of Finance received indicated it was funded entirely by bonding. Both you and the Director of Finance clarified that although our document showed that, the actual approval was different.
Yeah, and that was, we actually had that discussion in our workshop that part of the selling point for the project as a whole was not to spend the $950,000, but to get a grant for a good chunk of it. We talked to Tom about including that in the capital budgeting, and it just somehow didn't make it in there, but the intent was that we approved it knowing that we'd hopefully get half of that money. So it was just a miss that it wasn't documented, but that was the intent. And that was clarified today.
Okay, so we do not approve the CIP, but our CIP does show it bond funded, so if we could just adjust it to bond and grant in the summary, or has that been updated?
It was the project sheet that hadn't been updated, but the actual 6-year plan did reflect half of the funding in year 2. For the half of the 950 was accounted for as grant funding. So that master document had it accounted for. It was just the project sheet that didn't have the breakdown.
Is that on?
That would be. The CIP starts on page 70. So in the 6-year plan, that funding source column refers to how we're funding year one projects. So year one, you'll see for the Memorial Pool redesign, it says capital reserve fund. That's for the 150 in year one. So year two shows the full 950, and you wouldn't see the breakdown until you go down to the funding. It would probably be a page or two later where we break down the funding sources. So half of that 950 would be included in the bonding line, half of it is included in the grants line.
Okay. So I think going forward, that's probably an opportunity we have to clarify funding for the public, because it looks like it's just, the whole project is funded
Under
by
bond.
bonds, if you just look at it.
Yeah.
Because it says funding source. So that's something we can work on. But we don't need to approve the future, so that's fine for this year, but just
We'll
clarifying
make
for
sure
the
next
public.
year that it is changed.
Okay. Then the other thing you'll see in our motions is a definition of departments. This is new for us. This is a result of the work that Bert and I and the Board of Finance did. Some of the new members did not have the opportunity to work on that when we did supplemental appropriations. The town charter in section 812F prescribes certain procedures for the transfer of funds or appropriations from one department to another after the budget is adopted, but the charter does not state what constitutes a department for this rule. The purpose of this motion is to clarify the definition of a department under section 812F. Council, when we reviewed the policy, did recommend that we define departments. It will just make it easier. Section 812F reads, upon the request of the Board of Selectmen, during the last 6 months of the fiscal year, the Board of Finance may, by resolution, transfer any unencumbered appropriation, balance, or portion thereof from one department, commission, board, or office to another, provided, however, that the provision shall not apply to the Board of Education. No transfer shall be made from any appropriation for debt service or other statutory charges. The Board of Finance discussed the need to define departments in its discussion on a draft transfer policy last year. The proposed definitions of departments are generally based on past practice, and they coincide with the structure of the Board of Selectmen's budget book. The reason why this is important, the Board of Finance approves individual line items for the Board of Selectmen budget, and you will see that in the attached document. But after the budget passes, the charter gives the Board of Selectmen the authority to approve line item transfers within a department. So they're going to use the line items we've approved to approve transfers within. So Parks and Rec wants to change from mowing to tree trimming. The Board of Selectmen approves that. But the Board of Finance is responsible for approving transfers between departments. Public Works needs more money and they want to take it from Parks and Rec, it has to go through us. Departments that need more money than has been appropriated to the department must request a supplemental appropriation and/or transfer before they may spend or commit funds in total. Just as a clarification for departments, this does not apply to between boards, commissions, and offices. So slightly different. It's very complicated, but the bottom line is we're just defining what departments are so that we can comply with the charter. You will see that we are adding the library program and the funding for the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association to the operating budget. So this will be an increase in the operating budget, but not an increase in taxes because it will be funded by capital reserves for this year. The reason why we're putting it in the operating budget is because eventually this will be transitioned into the operating budget. Are there any other questions that board members have of staff before we begin to take the motions? Any clarifications?
Well, we had discussion on the individual
Yes.
motions. And I'd just like to clarify for the public and for those who may have missed the last episode of our show, where this fits. The Board of Education, the Board of Selectmen have proposed budgets, as you heard, that would have increased taxes by 6.5%. And this came as part of a process in which we asked each of those boards to reduce their initial proposals, and both of them did. And we undertook, as a Board of Finance, to find ways to contribute to that process and bring the tax increase under 5%. And most of the work to do that was performed. It was easy for us to ask. It was mostly our chair and the director of finance and the director of budget, Lisa and Amy and Melissa, who did that hard work and came up with these measures. And that's what most of these motions, not all of them, are going to deal with now.
All right.
Just a question, we're going to do 12 motions?
There's even more than that, but yes.
I'm just for context, if they were all approved, what would that do to the mill rate? Would that be, well, just that, what would it do to the mill rate if all of these were to be approved?
Amy?
What's that?
4.97.
4.97. I just wanted that to be clarified before we.
When we get to interest investment income, Art Wallace will have an update for us, so we may consider that. Before we begin, Todd, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I was going to ask Amy to put up the final exhibit to get the same answer that Well, 4.97, I didn't want to sort of point out something.
Well, and I think the reason is that you don't want to vote for these blindly. So the final point comes to the under 5% that we've been aiming at. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, while Amy's pulling that up, I'll just mention that as we've seen this year, there was no grand list growth, so we have a little bit of a dilemma as to what we can fund and what we can't. I do want to thank everyone again who's worked on these budgets. I do want to mention that the role of the Board of Finance originated from a number of needs. It's been documented by state courts and the state legislature, but we are charged with serving as the town agency to consider the financial aspects of the town as a whole, rather than from the standpoint of any one officer or department. What might be a priority within one department, for example, might not be the top townwide organizational priority when weighed against other departmental needs, knowing that unfortunately we can't fund everything that we would like to fund. The resources are just not available. So we have talked in the past about the types of things the Board of Finance weighs in making its decision. And for me, I'll just restate, as is typical in most municipal governments, we look at, is it public safety related? Is it a state or federal mandate? Are we preserving, maintaining current assets or natural resources? Will this help grow the grand list or promote economic development? Will this spending reduce operating costs through efficiencies? Or will this add new operating costs associated with the project or service? Can this project be delayed without increasing costs? Is this a priority of the policy boards for needed new service? How many people will this serve? Does this project leverage grant dollars or private donations? What does success look like and how will we measure it? And are we maintaining the long-term fiscal health of the town? Is Simsbury remaining economically competitive with its neighboring towns? And finally, can our friends and neighbors living on fixed incomes afford this? So I did want to just ask Mark Nelson to speak to. Can you talk about the metrics as to how you decided which capital projects were funded versus not? We have a series of projects that are unfunded, including some bridge and dam work, a highway street sweeper, roofs, high school stadium locker remodel. Can you just talk about the metrics you used to determine which projects you thought were worthy of funding?
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Chair. So, we as a new town manager, it was good to come in with fresh set of eyes and take a look at everything. It's very much on the operating side, you would call it zero-based budgeting, where you're starting from scratch and you're rebuilding the budget. On the capital side, it was really a great team effort on the part of the team you see here and all of our department heads. We spent hours over the course of weeks going through each and every single request. One of the things that and I'm glad to get a chance to mention this, that we want to be able to show, both on the operating side and on the capital side, is what we chose not to fund. And this is not something that was previously done. So as the new town manager, when I come in and I look at all the budget books, I see, what's proposed and what's approved, but I don't see where leadership said, no, you know what, we cannot afford this. And there were a lot of things that we did on the administrative side internally to keep our expenses as low as we could. On the capital side, we're also in complete agreement with this board's recommendation that we limit bonding to that 10 million every 2 years. It's a really brilliant idea that through the collaboration that we saw this year in the budget process, I think a number of good things have come out of it. The second thing is with respect to capital, we've created, and I understand, I was told that this was done previously in the town, maybe not recently, but we've created a category of unfunded for capital. And these are the things that we want to keep on the back burner, but we want to do it in a way that this board and more importantly the public can understand that these are things that department heads and outside stakeholders, external stakeholders are saying the community needs or the town needs, but we don't have the money to do it yet. And so what you're seeing is on the capital side, everything below the line is unfunded. And now we all know, the Board of Education, the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, we all know together what we'd love to do, what we need to do, what we're being told we should do, but we know that those items are unfunded. What we're approving tonight and what hopefully will be approved at referendum are the most important things that staff and others whom we asked. One of the things I've tried to do in my first 100 days is meet with community members, be out in the community more, talk to taxpayers, some of whom you've heard from, who can't afford and rightly so don't want to raise their rents. I've met with them as well. And so I just want to assure this board and the public that even before the budget goes to you, there are multiple levels of let's just focus on entirely what we need at the moment. So, and I hope that answered the question, but I'll stay at the mic in case there's another one or a follow-up from anybody.
Just for members of the public, the following projects of the next year or two are not funded. House Rest Pond Bridge and Dam, Curtis Park parking improvements, repaving and parking improvements for the recreational facilities, paving of neighborhood paths and connecting trails, athletic field complex, security fire alarm upgrades, a highway street sweeper, town hall roof, site improvements and dumpster canopies for the landfill, the DPW facility upkeep, Simsbury High School electrical service distribution, Henry James roof replacement, Simsbury High School stadium facility, Simsbury High School locker room remodel, grass field allocation, and Tooten Hills replace exterior windows and doors. So, and there are more in the out years that are unfunded. So I just want to make people understand the choices we're making today means that these do not have a funding source. They will be reevaluated for next year for grants. We might be able to use some for reserves, but
And thank you, Chair. I think, again, just to emphasize the fact that we're trying the newer approach of also incorporating the things that are not being funded at this point, because obviously we'll be back talking about them next year and the year beyond. And I think that's why, from a staff side, and I know the Board of Selectmen agree as well, sharply limiting bonding until, our debt service levels off. And Latimer comes off, again, 2%, roughly 2% of the proposed tax increase is related to Latimer, which of course passed, overwhelmingly at referendum. So, the tax increases that we're seeing this year are related to choices that the community made in the past. So my goal and our goal on the staff side, supported by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, is to not only give you the best information that we can, but share with you earlier in the process the challenges that we can already anticipate next year and the year beyond, which is exactly what you're doing at the Board of Finance. But, the last thing I'll say is what we've said from the beginning is that with 0.06 grand list growth, we have a longer-term problem. And then I want to lastly thank this board for its rather innovative approach to helping us on the revenue side and the other things that we're talking about tonight. Bond premium is not something done before, but I've seen it in my career many times, probably too many times. But it was, I think we're getting to a very good end result that we wish it could be 3 or 3.5. And we worked very hard to get it as low as we could. So thank you, Chair.
Actually, I would like to make a point, because everyone should understand that you came to office here in January, in the middle of the budget process.
Thank you for.
And under circumstances that you did not create, and which create huge budget challenges, including, as you point out, the Latimer Lane expenditures and the increase in those expenditures due to unforeseen inflation in the last 2 years, and zero grand list growth, et cetera. This year is particularly challenging, and the budgets that Amy projected, or rather Amy's projections for the following years, are a little bit better. We don't expect a 5% increase next year. And again, I should also point out, in that limited amount of time, when this board asked the town to reduce its budget, you were able to find ways to do that. But the budgets we're looking at in the out years are still higher than, the increases are still higher than inflation. At the last meeting, I asked you whether any part of this year's budget represented a reduction in expenses year over year on any line items. You told me they did not. And I'm hoping that in the future, when we talk about zero-based budgeting, it means we're going to reorder some priorities when you've had a chance to look at them more carefully.
Right.
And produce that sort of thing, because it would be, I'm hoping that next year we can actually produce a budget that comes within the guidelines that we agree on in December.
Right. I'm optimistic, and thank you for those comments. I think that, as we talked about, at least with the Board of Selectmen, there's a real emphasis on the administrative side to boost grant revenue, to boost really all sources of non-tax revenue. Last night at the Board of Selectmen meeting, I think, was at least the first time I've seen it since I've been there. I think they had 4 or 5 grant authorizations, didn't we, Wendy, where the board authorized, grant submissions. So we're starting to see that. If you look at those agendas, we bring those to the Board of Selectmen regularly. We've charged all our department heads to double down on grant revenue, and hopefully we'll see some dividends on that. And as I get into it a little deeper, as you suggested, the issue is going to be all about efficiencies and where we can start to make some cuts. But obviously, we weren't in a position to do that quickly enough. I'd just say, to as many of you know, I came from New York. My previous city was on a different fiscal year. They were on the calendar year. And so I had just submitted the budget when I left Poughkeepsie. So I feel like I've been in budget for about a year now, and I recommend approval so we can go back to work. Thank you, everybody.
Before you sit down, Mr. Town Manager.
Sorry, sir.
It's all right.
You're off. One more time.
One more time.
Very good. Stop. Nope. One more time. Stop. Good.
You're totally colorblind.
Talk loud.
Yes. As we've said in the course of putting this budget together, first of all, we didn't give you much of a grace period. It's not like you came on here and had a chance to get up to speed. You had to come on full speed. I'd just like to say, is before we start this motion, 2 points. One is, there's been a combination of professional and volunteer review of these budgets. I said once before, we did not get you from central casting. We got you because you understand municipal budgets. The same on the Board of Education side. The superintendent of schools does the same thing. And we have here sitting at the table professional reviewers. And we've been demanding about them. I mean, those who are watching this now, this is not the beginning of scrutiny. We received budgets and we said they're not cut enough. And we went back and the professional staffers cut them more. And then the volunteers on the Board of Education, the Board of Selectmen, cut them even further. And we contributed. I think your salary, Madam Chair, does not exist. You are a volunteer as well. And you were able to contribute to the third leg of that stool up there to show that we also have contributed to getting to this point. You mentioned the hardship, and I'd just like to say that I read all of these ones that are sent to us, as I'm sure my colleagues do, and it's become clear this year that there are citizens of our town who present very heartfelt stories that they will not be able to live here any longer if we have a second 5% increase. That's 10% over 2 years. They cannot afford it. At the same time, there are people who are extremely proud of what we have in this town, the services we provide, the safety, the public spaces, the amenities that we've talked about here today. And what I fear is that we are approaching and we're going to a fork in the road, whereby doing the things that this town deems really necessary to do is not affordable for a lot of our citizens, and they will no longer be able to live here. So this has been a difficult year, but I just wanted to emphasize that not only do we have professional review, there was a point made earlier we would have a volunteer review. There has been extensive voluntary review, and then the public has weighed in as well, and we have listened to those comments. So I don't mean to keep you from your chair any longer, but I just want to reflect the fact that we do realize this is an extremely difficult year, and it is one which is really heartfelt by the people of this town who've made their feelings known to us.
I don't know what to say other than to echo what you just said. I think that I feel fortunate to be here, and thank you to everybody that brought me to Simsbury. There's nothing better in public service than to feel that you can have an impact. And I think it's an important time for me to be here with the great team that has already been here, because you're absolutely right. It's not a tipping point yet. You're hearing it. It's coming. But if we don't increase our grand list, if we don't find deeper efficiencies in local government, and I will, with all respect to our colleagues on the Board of Ed side, it is, as we heard from public comment, I think 70 or 73% of the town's budget is going on the education side, not on the municipal side that I'm responsible for. That's something that I think we need to keep an eye on, because when that number changes, you start to get out of balance. And I think that that's important. But, the Board of Selectmen have, recently, I think last night actually, adopted their goals. Number one goal, they haven't prioritized it yet, but number one on the sheet is economic development and grand list growth, which you've heard a lot about. And I think, my job is to work with my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen and with the business community and other stakeholders to make sure that we're not standing here next year looking at 0.06% grand list growth. Now, I can't snap my fingers and make something happen, but I think this budget process for me, and I've been, as you said, budgeting for years, I really think this was a strong process because everybody's paying attention. You've got some tremendous volunteers, experts on boards and commissions all throughout the town, and everybody's paying attention. So I am very optimistic that, and I can, publicly say that I won't be adding 4 new positions next year as the chair and others have, and we appreciate your support for the things that on the town side we asked for. I was challenged because I was new. I didn't have the background on, SIMPAC and the Flower Bridge and everything. I went out and talked to members of the community just like you do, and the Board of Selectmen strongly support all 3 of those in addition to supporting the ambulance and doing what we've got to do there. So tough choices. But thank you for the comments, and thank you for the work that you all do.
Todd.
Thank you.
Yep.
Not really a question for you, I was just going to make a comment.
Please.
I'm not sure if this is working. But, everyone's going to walk away from this budget with something that they're not happy with. What I found very encouraging tonight and the last public hearing, and I'm sure that there are vehicles to take care of this, and I just don't know about them. But what I was very encouraged was that everybody who came up to support or talk about something that was important to them or they didn't necessarily support, everybody made a comment about wanting to work with everybody else, the business owners, the folks on the bridge. And I hope that we've got the vehicles in town to make sure that those coordinations can take place, because I think that will also be a huge help going forward with what we do to invest in the town.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready for some motions? Mike, did you have anything you wanted to say? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. The thing that keeps ringing in my head time and time and time again, and I may have said this publicly already, I may not have, is it took us 350 years to get to $100 million, which we surpassed in 2020. And by all accounts in the forecasting we're doing, in the next 10 years, we are going to be halfway to our next $100 million with a $150 million budget. And that is weighing heavily on me, just because, you know, the fact that our grand list growth is so low, you know, is probably indicative of times to come. So we don't have a revenue problem. And I know everybody tried their best this year, but I'm not confident it's enough.
Thank you. Okay. Well, we're going to start, and I already know we're going to have discussion on the first one. But as is typical for the Board of Finance, we invite the newest members to read the motions. We'll take the motion, the second from the new members, and then we'll have discussion. So Art, would you like to start with the first motion?
Sure. So we have a motion effective April 16th, 2024 to amend the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget by increasing revenues in the finance department, interest on investments by $550,000. The line item is adjusted from 1.3 million to 1.85 million.
Todd, is there a second?
Sure.
Okay, we'll open it up for discussion. If you will, members of the public may recall, at our last meeting, we did ask Art Wallace to work with the finance director on this issue to determine if this was the right number, evaluating where we have our money invested, what we think the projections are on interest rates, to make sure that we have an accurate number for investment, with the understanding that what goes up comes down. As interest rates are up, they will eventually come down. So we want to be prudent, conservative, but not overly conservative. So Art, can you update us on what you have?
Yeah, and some of the background, and Amy will keep me honest on all this. So this money and the interest coming off of this is invested in short-term funds. So we're looking at either money market type funds or the Connecticut STIF, I believe is what we call it, right? I believe that what we have at the 1.85, that reflects, is that 3 point? I need Amy to confirm this, so. Okay, at the 1.85, is that reflective of the 3.6% that we've talked about previously? So again, by way of background then, so we're assuming a 3.6% interest rate right now. What we have right now currently, I think, is over 5%. What we're actually earning right now is over 5%. To the chair's point, these are short-term funds, though, so they can change. They're not locked in. And so there's a couple things here. One, I believe, is a question: do we want to take up some of that space and say, instead of being so conservative at 3.6, do we want to actually project this at a higher level, because that would be direct revenue and that could impact and help us to continue to decrease the amount of burden on the mill rate. The second thing is, are there actions we can actually take to make that happen and lock that in? And Amy and I have had some brief discussions, but to sort of get it on the public record, is to look at some of our banking relationships and figure out if we can enter into CDs and things like that so that we can lock that money in, so that we're not worried for at least portions of it if interest rates were to drop. We obviously need to think through that in terms of the cash schedule and everything, and time that correctly when we have the right revenues in. But I would be, I'll sort of show my cards here. I would be comfortable with us at least moving part of the way there and maybe into the, call it 4.25%. We've also done a little bit of homework, and again, the chair can add to this as well, but did a little bit of homework looking at some other municipalities, and we have at least some other examples where some comparable municipalities are using 4 or a little bit over 4.
So we do know Glastonbury is using 4%. One of our neighbors is as well. Amy, can you walk us through, one, any risks associated with doing that, and then two, what that would do to the mill rate if we were to adopt the 4%?
So, risk associated, so I always tend to be more conservative on the changes and things of that nature. I think Art's plan to look into CDs, you know, where the interest rates are going to be in the time that we do that. So I've given him a time frame. We can start talking to the financial institutions whenever we're ready, but I would really like to get through collections for July prior to making any cash flow estimates for money that we don't want to touch for the rest of the year, 6 months, whatever it may be. Because we don't want to have to pay fees to get out of a CD that we can't commit to. And then that will also give time for the Latimer Lane project to be finalized and the millions of dollars of payments going out there, so that those are not included in those projections. So those are the only two risks I see. Even at the 4.25, I can run the numbers. I actually printed it out for him. You can see where our interest rates are. If you go on the Connecticut short-term investment fund website, it gives you all of the daily rates. I printed out for Art. We are at like 5% right now. So assuming interest rates come down slowly, there's no major economic crises that happen that make that company down in a very short time frame. 4.25 is probably okay. Again, just planning for those out years where we will have to reduce it.
What would the number be if we use 4.25 or 4%? How much more would we add to the interest investment income line
At
item?
4.25, we'd add another $275,000, and that brings the tax increase down to 4.68.
I'm sorry, for what? 4.68.
And at 4%?
At 4.25? And at 4%, what would it be?
So 4%, we would add 150,000 to the budget, and then that would bring our tax change to 4.81.
And at 200?
$4.75.
Can I open it up for discussion on considerations there?
Your 200 was what, Chair?
I chose between the 4% and 4.25.
Oh, I got you, just the
Yeah.
dollar amount you were
Yeah.
picking. Okay, thank you.
Well, there's some people who are in this business. I mean, what do we think is prudent? I don't want to, be banking on a higher interest rate that we're not going to achieve, obviously. So I rely on a professional recommendation here as to what is reasonable and cautious.
We did have our fiducian advisor say 5.1 when we consulted with them, but that was a few months ago, so we don't have an update there. But Amy, do you have thoughts?
I mean, I'm comfortable with the 4.25 going into next year.
Comfortable with what? I'm sorry to hear.
I'm comfortable with the 4.25 going into next year. Really, more of the concern is the out years, because we know it's going to come down eventually. So when are we addressing that cliff in the out years?
Don't we also use the conservatism to build up funds for the capital projects?
Yes,
So
we do.
that is a risk too, because it pulls it out of that.
But I guess the question would be, are we comfortable with what we've already projected in for capital? Or do we need to have this come in better? If we did use 4.25, do we need it to come in better than 4.25 to have a reasonable financial result?
So we don't need it to come in better than 4.25 for fiscal year 25. It kind of gets you into the fiscal year 26 budget of what capital do you want to, it starts the budget discussion all over again, fiscal year 26 of how much in reserves do you want to pay for which projects? And we're just not there yet.
So to play that out, if it could have us pushing out a mill rate increase, then we could be okay with it for this year, but then next year, if it dropped, if the interest rate dropped, then we would have to run that through.
Right.
But we budget conservatively for tax revenues to fund capital reserves. It's not traditionally the case that we use the budgeting for the interest rate assumption as a way of, in our
Yes.
calculation of getting reasonable
A little bit we do.
capital. A little bit we do.
Yeah, so a couple of things, like we typically have taken, 2 to 3 million in surplus a year and put it into capital reserve and utilized it for capital. The original intention years ago is that you budget the difference in the tax collection rate and then that's your contribution to capital. So going back to the original, it's what do you want to do in fiscal year 26? Do you want 3 million or are you happy with, say, $1 million?
Yeah, so that's where it gets. What is the difference in dollar amount to the taxpayer going from 497 to 475? I think was the number you came up with. Can you pull up the mill rate document again?
So the 200,000 was the 475, so that's $413. So it goes from $432 to $413.
Which is 17? Do I have that right? So it's $17 a year, so a little over $1 a month?
That was 19.
Did I get the numbers right? I'm doing it on the fly here.
It was 432.
It's 19.
19. So about
I
$1.50.
think it's fine to think about it that way. I guess the danger with that is everything will feel like it's $1 here or there.
Exactly.
And so, like, to me, I do think that there's just a visibility impact. You guys have heard me say this many times. I think being near even 5%, I think is odd in a situation that we're in today, given no grand list growth, given CPI of 3.2. So I feel like in a year where we have that situation, not going all the way to where current interest rates are today, so there's still some conservatism in there. I think it's something that, to me, as long as we go in with our eyes open and we have action that we can take, later this year to lock some of this in, it seems like a reasonable approach for us to, get us, at least materially below 5% at this point.
Also, Amy, next year we are projecting, to Mark's point, a little bit of grand list growth, I think 0.83%. So that will help if there is a decrease in the interest rates. We can make it up at that point as well.
Right.
I don't disagree. Open it up.
I agree with Art.
Are you at 425 or 4? Let's settle on a number. Amy's comfortable at 425?
I'm comfortable with 425.
I'm comfortable with 425, and if it's a matter of like not having enough money in the capital, we haven't decided what's in there yet, so we can say, oh, we don't have that 200. I'd rather help now, given what we heard.
Okay. Art, Bert?
I'm with it. So I will make a proposal for a friendly amendment to the motion.
So we're going to, Amy, do the math. 550
Well,
plus
no, it's
275?
It's 275, right, so I can,
You can do that? I can't.
no, I'm going to let Amy do it. I think it's 825, but I'm going to defer.
Oh, it's 275,000.
2.125.
Oh, that's right, because we have the original.
I've come up with 825 too.
825,000.
That took longer than I thought it would. All right, so
Okay.
I propose to amend the motion to increase revenues in the finance department, interest on investments by $825,000, which would adjust the line item from 1.3 million to,
Amy, can you get us that second number?
I should,
$2,125,000.
$2,125,000.
Right.
You accept that
accept that
amendment?
friendly-
amendment?
Sure do. So moved, yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second to increase interest on investment income by $825,000 to changing the line item from 1.3 million to 2,125,000. Have the numbers right there?
In changing the 550 to 825.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Okay, good job, everyone. Thank you, Art and Amy, for your work on that, and without objection, we'll have Art continue to work with Amy. We may, at some point, need to hire a consultant. Our fiducian did say they would be willing to consult with us on what vehicles to do that, so as that continues, we'll authorize Art to continue working with Amy to come up with suggestions after July as to where we can put the money. Okay.
Obviously at a reasonable cost. I just want to make sure we say that because I
Of course.
think this isn't rocket science, and we want to make sure that we get a consultant involved, but not to pay more than we should.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I think that goes without saying on this one. All right. We're ready for the second motion. We'll go with, again, Art and then Todd.
So back to me?
Yeah.
Okay. So motion effective April 16th, 2024 to increase library, adult, and young adult technical and program supplies by $4,131.50 to account for the summer outreach literacy program and to include a transfer of $4,131.50 from the capital reserve fund into the general fund, ARPA, ARPA themed funds.
Second?
Any discussion? This is, again, that we had planned on funding this from capital reserves. It was originally in the capital budget. We're just moving it to the operating budget. No mill rate impact. It's still being funded by capital reserves. Okay. We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Okay, why don't we just keep going, Art, Todd?
So back to me again.
Motion 3.
Okay. Todd's doing the seconds. I got it.
Yep.
Effective April, sorry, it's my first time. Effective April 16th, 2024, to amend the proposed fiscal year 2024 to 2025 budget by reducing the operating transfers CNR payback line item by $60,000. The CNR payback line item is adjusted from $476,250 to $416,250.
I second that.
The reason for this change, as you'll recall, we're not doing the payback, but we're using capital reserves. By not doing the payback, we reduce the payback line item. So it's just a reduction to reflect that change. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. 4.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to reduce the debt service line item by $866,643. The line item is adjusted from $8,915,868 to $8,049,225.
Second?
Again, this motion just reflects the delaying of the bond issuance. As you saw in my presentation, just by doing that, we reduce the debt service payment. In the out years, we will make up for that by using capital reserves. Those motions will be taken at a later time. Any discussion on this motion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Motion 5.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to increase Board of Selectmen Community Services Public Agency support by $200,000 and to include a transfer of $200,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund into the General Fund for the fiscal year 2024-2025 contribution to the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association. Further move to assign $200,000 from General Fund reserves to phase in future operating costs for support of the Simsbury Voluntary Ambulance Association.
Second?
Again, this is just, the intent was to fund it from capital reserves. We had it in the capital budget. We're transitioning it to the operating budget, but funded with capital reserves, no mill rate impact. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. Motion 6.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to amend the proposed fiscal year 2024-2025 budget by increasing revenues in the Education Department regular tuition by $75,000. The line item is adjusted from $122,898 to $197,898.
I'll second that.
Again, this is just a revenue correction. Although it is collected by the Board of Education, those monies come into the general fund. So we are increasing the general fund to reflect actuals of what we were seeing. Any further discussion on this? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Motion 7.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to approve a transfer of $1 million from the Capital Reserve Fund to the CNR Fund for the purposes of funding fiscal year 2024-2025 projects. $700,000 for Board of Education and $300,000 for Board of Selectmen.
Second?
Again, this was a reflection of the Board of Finance's change from doing the payback system to funding it outright through capital reserves. No change in the projects. We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Motion 8.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to amend the proposed fiscal year 2024-2025 capital improvement plan as recommended by the Board of Selectmen on March 25th, 2024, reflected in the attached, with the exception that the Memorial Pool redesign project will reflect a funding source of capital reserve fund, not bonds.
Second it?
Is there any discussion? I have one point of discussion. I am reluctant to do this. I will support the motion because I think it will support looking for grant funding. Looking at the projects we are not funding, including a roof, some pavement of existing projects, street sweeper, necessary things. I don't think this project can be funded without grants, substantial grants. I think it will require more than 50% grants to do that. But as it is a priority of Culture Parks and Rec, I'm open to them exploring the grant possibility. As I understand from the Director of Finance, getting a grant is very difficult if they do not have the designs in place. So I will support that, but I am not committing to funding it next year until we see the prioritization of all capital projects against this. We have limited dollars to fund capital next year. They're going to have to be, although it is a top priority of Culture Parks and Rec, whether it remains a top priority of the overall organization. We heard from the Board of Education that they have a bunch of unfunded capital needs. In fact, they've only funded 10%. Does this top that? Does this top roofs? Does this top public safety things? But because it is only 150 and because it is not being bonded and in cash, and because it will support the exploration of a grant, I will not oppose it at this point. Is there any other discussion on that?
Yeah, I would second those sentiments. The Board of Selectmen has represented to us that this is necessary to get the project off the ground in the hopes that we'll find funding for it. And I think that's worth spending money on because Memorial Pool we're going to have to do something with the pool going forward. But we're going to have to take a hard look at the project itself before we spend $900,000 on it.
Just like to record my reservations and skepticism you both have stated. I think if I defer to the Board of Selectmen to get us under this 5% cap. We are under 5% in our mill rate increase, and so I associate myself with both of these comments made.
All right. Any other discussion?
I think it's important that we do view these as two separate decisions because I think to the point we just have to underscore that if we had another year of lack of grand list growth and this comes back and we don't get a grant of the size that we think, I don't think it's a slam dunk that we do this, which could have us regretting this 150, but I think that is what it is given the support that we've heard.
Okay. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion, any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Okay, 9.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to assign $850,000 from general fund reserves to offset the health insurance operating cliff in fiscal year 2025-2026.
Second.
This motion, as you'll recall, the Board of Education is using $650,000 in capital reserves. The Board of Selectmen of health insurance reserves to offset the cost of the health costs for the operating budgets. This will create or could create a fiscal cliff. In anticipation of that, we are assigning general fund reserves to accommodate that cliff should it arise. Just to remind folks, our policy is excess reserves of 20% reserves can be used to offset health insurance costs. Our consultant has recommended that we only use 1/3 of health reserves. We are using more than 1/3, but because we are using more than 1/3, we will be doing the general fund assignment to accommodate any cliff. At this point, it's not clear that there will be a cliff. Amy, is that correct? Is there a possibility there could be no cliff? So it's a cautionary thing, but it's anticipated and planned for. If there is no cliff, that money will then be available for capital reserves. Okay. Is there any further discussion? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. 10.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to assign $250,000 from general fund reserves to offset the fiscal year 25 revenue loss from the motor vehicle mill rate cap and to budget $250,000 from general fund reserves for fiscal year 2025 revenues.
Second.
This, as you'll recall, members of the public, the state instituted a motor vehicle cap. This means we are not receiving reimbursement from the state because the reimbursement is done a year later. Next year, we will have that reimbursement. This will not create a fiscal cliff. It's just to accommodate the loss of revenue this year from the way the state law is structured. Any further discussion on this? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. 11.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to assign $205,749 from general fund reserves for the purpose of reimbursing the Parks and Recreation Fund for a pension overpayment in fiscal year 2024. Supplemental appropriation and transfer to the Parks and Recreation Special Revenue Fund is anticipated and planned for upon the close of fiscal year 2024.
Second.
As folks may recall, there was an actuarial mistake, and the Parks and Rec Special Revenue Fund was overcharged. This will reimburse them. This is an assignment, and an assignment is an intent to spend money. It is not an actual spend. The motion to spend that money will occur in October when we close the books on the 2024 budget. So this is just a motion to assign. Any further discussion? We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Motion 12.
Effective April 16th, 2024, to transfer the premium from the second Latimer Lane debt issuance to the Capital Reserve Fund upon receipt, anticipated to be $1 million.
Second.
This is what we talked about, using bond premium to reduce debt service. That will be done in the fiscal year 2026 budget, but we will get the bond premium this year. This authorizes the Director of Finance upon receipt to transfer it immediately to capital reserves without coming back to us for our secondary motion. Any further discussion? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Okay.
Ran out of numbers.
All right, so effective April 16th, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Selectmen annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $28,884,809.
Todd?
Second.
Melissa, no changes we made in revenue impacts that, correct? Okay. We have a motion, we have a second. This reflects the numbers we have just made. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. We go on to,
Board of Education.
wait,
No,
we
no.
have, do we do the departments? Is the motion there for the departments, Melissa? My thing is not showing the motion there.
I think that
Yeah.
applies to the motion above, correct? That schedule, I think, is the detail
Yeah.
of the 28.9 million.
Can we get a clarification on the motion that we're comfortable that we approve the departments as listed and the amounts listed? Would that work, Melissa, for our definition? Okay. Friendly amendment to that?
Yes, I propose that the motion be amended to indicate that the appropriations should accord with the appropriations listed on page 3 of our packet,
And define departments as such.
and define the departments as such.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, accepted. We have a motion amended. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. Okay.
Let me read the next few. I feel silly just saying second.
Okay, we'll alternate. If you could do the seconds.
I mean, you can keep going.
Oh,
but,
no, go
it's-
for it, go for it.
All right.
Taking the bat out of his hand.
We'll go down to the next motion.
Yes.
Okay, motion effective April 16th, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Education annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025, shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $85,217,644.
Second.
Good job. Any further discussion? All right, we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Todd?
I'll keep going. Next motion. Motion effective April 16, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of non-public schools annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $588,724.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Todd?
Okay. Motion effective April 16, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the debt service annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025, shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $8,049,225.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Todd?
Motion effective April 16, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the sewer use fund, sewer treatment plant, annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025, shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $4,808,496.
Second.
I think there's a little more to the motion on the next page.
Further?
Oh. It's on the second page for me, I got it.
Further.
The Board of Finance anticipates revenues and planned expenditures from the sewer use fund as presented in the attached budget summary.
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Todd?
A motion effective April 16, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Parks and Recreation Special Revenue Fund annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025, shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $2,884,828. Further, the Board of Finance anticipates revenues and planned expenditures from the Parks and Recreation Special Revenue Fund as presented in the attached budget summary.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Next, effective April 16, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Residential Property Special Revenue Fund annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025, shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $55,827. Further, the Board of Finance anticipates revenues and planned expenditures from the Residential Property Special Revenue Fund as presented in the attached budget summary.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Todd?
Effective April 16, 2024, that the appropriations recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the annual budgets for the following special revenue funds for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2025, shall be approved and implemented in the amounts shown below. $31,573 for the preservation of historic documents, $79,078 for the town clerk LOCIP fund.
Second.
Any further discussion? We have a motion, we have a second, no further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Todd, are you still good to keep going?
I think I got this one more in me.
Okay. It's a long one.
Yeah, I know. I know. Okay. Effective April 16th, 2024, that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying expenses, the expenses for the fiscal year 2024 capital non-recurring CNR projects be approved and implemented in the amount of $3,125,794, including, and I'm going to list them off.
Yep.
These are in dollars. $414,340 to be funded by the general fund via the 5-year payback method. $284,337 to be funded by the general fund department line items. $1,709,537 to be funded by the capital reserve fund. $91,580 to be funded by the town aid road fund. $250,000 to be funded by the sewer use fund. $42,000 to be funded by project savings. $21,500 to be funded by the Eno Trust Fund. $217,500 to be funded by the Simsbury Farms Fund balance. $95,000 to be funded by the Golf Equipment Fund. Further move that all CNR projects are approved as individual project appropriations capped in the amount listed for each project and financed from the sources listed for each project as attached to this motion. Further, in accordance with town policy, that for the capital non-recurring CNR projects only, CNR projects may exceed the individual project appropriation in the current fiscal year by $5,000 or 20% of total project budget, whichever is less, so long as the anticipated overages do not exceed anticipated savings from other CNR projects. In such instances, transfers will be approved at year-end close. In all other instances, expenditures above the approved project appropriation shall be approved in advance in accordance with the town charter.
Second. Hold on.
So you will see that this motion incorporates current town policy where we do permit overages and corrections at year end for small overages, so we don't have to come back for every little minor correction. We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. We'll switch to Art Wallace for the next motion.
Effective April 16th, 2024,
Oops, one too many 2024s there.
that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses for the fiscal year 2024-2025 capital improvement plan projects be approved and implemented in the amount of $11,737,501. CIP projects are approved as individual project appropriations capped in the amount listed for each project and financed from the sources listed for each project as described in the resolutions and as recommended by the town's bond council.
Second.
This is similar to the CNR. The one difference is the bond council resolution language are what is funded. Any discrepancies we see in numbers in other parts of the budget books do not count. It is the bond resolutions that count, which is why the motion is listed as such. We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion? All those
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I serve on the Performing Arts Center. Is the money that's being voted on for the Performing Arts Center in this resolution?
It is. Would you like us to, I did not follow up with you, I'm sorry. What is the advice?
That's okay, so I think I would just be more comfortable if I was thinking the conflict.
Okay. So we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions?
Me.
Any opposed? The motion passes 5-1 with one abstention by Mike Doyle. Okay.
Madam Chair, just, I believe it's
Yeah.
5-0 with one abstention.
Correct. Thank you. Correction. 5-0 with one abstention. 5 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention. Okay.
Effective April 16th, 2024, that the reading into the minutes of the full text of the resolution set out is waived. Copies of the resolutions having been made available to those in attendance and recorded in these records immediately preceding these, and that the Board of Finance recommends and approves the projects as presented.
So you have with you, can you lift that up? This was provided in advance of the meeting, and it's a list of all the bond resolutions. And Melissa has them up. It shows what is being approved. Can you just read the front page so that the public has notice as to what it is we are approving?
Not the whole front page, just the resolution.
But
This part here?
You've already read that top resolution. So you can start where it says resolve the Board of Finance recommends and approves the following.
we'll go through the numbers.
I tried to spare you.
Okay, are you guys ready?
Yeah, it's right up there too. We can follow along.
All right. Resolved that the Board of Finance Selectmen recommends and approves the following. General purpose projects bonds. Highway pavement management bonding, $1,011,267. LOCIP grant, $245,233. Town aid road grant, $243,500. General fund, $100,000 for a total of $1.6 million. Sidewalk reconstruction, $223,400. Old Drake Hill Flower Bridge rehabilitation, supplemental, bonds, $495,000. Prior authorization, $2,269,000 for a total of $2,764,000. Town Hall rooftop units, $275,000. Municipal site and safety improvements, Town Hall, $460,000. Barn and facility repairs, Wolcott Road, $275,000. Dam evaluation and repairs, Stoddard Dam breach, $171,000. General purpose projects, non-bonds, Memorial Pool redesign capital reserve fund, $150,000. Simsbury Meadows Performing Arts Center Bandshell Edition, grants, $900,000, donations, $1,032,881. Capital Reserve Fund, $500,000. Prior authorization, $350,000 for a total of $2,782,881. Public Works Highway Truck Replacement and Plow, $266,220. Tariffville Connection, East Coast Greenway Gap Closure, grants, $360,000. Prior authorization, $90,000 for a total of $450,000. Sewer use, assessment funds and grants, sewer replacement, Pine Hill supplemental, $200,000. School projects, bonds, district network infrastructure, $350,000. District flooring improvements, $250,000. Simsbury High School auditorium and amphitheater improvements, $400,000. Tooten Hills replacement roof, bonding, $930,000. $190,000 state reimbursement for a total of $1,120,000.
So we have the resolution.
Second.
Okay, Amy, Melissa, have we read the resolution as you need it read for council? Okay. We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Not opposed, but I abstained.
Okay, one abstention, so we have 5 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention. Okay. Now, we are now going on to referendum questions. We have to recommend the referendum questions to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen will need to approve them. As I understand, there will be a special meeting on Thursday to do that. But we still have to approve these. This is what will show on the ballots. You will see that there are 2 capital projects that will be shown to the public that they will get to vote on during this. The reason for that is anything over 2% needs its own referendum question. Are you still good reading, or you want to?
Sure.
Okay.
effective April 16th, 2024, that in accordance with sections 406 automatic referendum and 808 duties of the Board of Finance on the budget of the charter, the recommended operating budgets will be submitted to a referendum in the following forms. 1, shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Selectmen annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025, be approved and implemented in the amount of $28,884,809.
Can we do them all together? You can keep going.
2, shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Education annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025, be approved and implemented in the amount of $85,217,644. 3, shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of sewer use fund, sewer treatment plant, residential property fund, parks and recreation, special revenue fund, non-public schools, debt retirement capital, and capital non-recurring annual budgets for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025 be approved and implemented in the amount of $19,512,894. 4, shall the town of Simsbury appropriate an additional $495,000 for an aggregate appropriation of $2,764,000 for the rehabilitation of the old Drake Hill Road Bridge and authorizing additional bonds and notes in the amount of $495,000 for an aggregate appropriation of $2,484,000 to finance a portion of said appropriation. 5, shall the town of Simsbury appropriate $900,000 in state grant funds, $1,032,881 in donations, and $500,000 in capital reserve funds, in addition to $350,000 in capital reserve funds previously appropriated for an aggregate amount of $2,782,881 for improvements to Performing Arts Center Bandshell Edition.
Melissa, there is one error in this. Question 4 says 495,000. So when we get to the minutes, can you add the 0 to reflect? Okay. It was said correctly by Art, so that will be the motion that will carry, but we'll make that correction. Well, in question 3, you'll see that there is an aggregate amount. One of the things I've asked Melissa to review with council next year is can we clean up those motions? We've been combining them for years. There's no clear reason as to why we do that and whether we can clean up those motions for next year. So we'll be reviewing those motions to see if, 1, they all need to go to referendum, and 2, should they be separated out. But for now, we're going to continue it the way we've always done it because it's been approved by council. You will see attached to this document are the line items. These are the line items that are approved as part of these budget resolutions, and they'll be included in the minutes so that it's all in one document. In the past, line items have been all over. Sometimes what's in the project descriptions, what's in the line item, what's in the budget books are different. So if there is any discrepancy, it is what is included in this package. If there is a mistake, we can clean it up through the normal budget amending process at year end. Okay.
Technical question.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yep.
So, in the first 3 referendum questions, the amount that is being voted on is bold and underlined. I don't know, like from a technical standpoint, can the 495 and the 900, like, is there a technical reason why in 4 and 5 there isn't something bold and underlined? I mean, so people know that they're voting on the additional 495.
That's a good question. Melissa, is there any objection to underlying 495 and the 500,000?
I don't think there's an issue with that. I can confirm.
If that's something we want to do, but, you know, when we talk about, you know, voting for the 2.7 right now, I mean, that's not what's hitting the numbers.
Correct.
It's the 495, even though we are approving the 2.7, I guess.
That makes sense.
I think that might make it clearer for people as to what the impact is.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the ballot from a prior year, and there's actually, those totals are not bolded and underlined on the actual ballot when you go to in the voting booth.
You mean for the first 3?
Correct,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And I'm not sure if there's even a way we can do that on the ballot. But certainly for, we're going to put these online and everything we post, we can bold and underline the actual supplemental amount that's being asked for approval.
That's fine too. I mean, I guess if that's what, other people think that as well, but
I think that's a good
I
suggestion.
think we've got them in the first three, and then the next two are like, what's really the impact?
And actually, if they could be on the ballot that way, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I'll
It's up
find out.
to
I want,
council.
okay, yeah.
Subject to council approval, we could do it that way. Are folks comfortable with that? Any objection to
Yes.
that? Okay, so that, we'll take that as a friendly request. All right,
Our voting town members are gonna be able to vote yes or no essentially on each of these 5.
yes.
So the delineate, because obviously the Drake Hill Bridge as well as the PAC have been like 2 of the more discussed and sort of controversial items. Are those on there just because they're not within those budgets and they're capital expenditures?
No, they're in there because the total amount is more than 2% of the operating budget, so by charter, we're required to put them to the voters. The total amount.
And that's it's just it's a bright line, there's no other.
Bright line. No option.
No option on those. I guess where I was going, Chair, was the splash pad is also a controversial one.
So we do have the opportunity to place something on the referendum. Obviously, that is, if it gets funded next year, that may be a consideration for next year. For the 150, I don't think it would
Rise to that amount.
that amount this year, but we certainly can. Interestingly enough, it's unclear whether these referendum questions are advisory or not. State statutes seem to indicate they're advisory. Our charter seems to indicate they're not, but in any event, we will follow them and adhere to what the citizens decide on that. So, but I think you make a good point.
And I guess my broader point is there any other judgment call we should make to add anything else to that list? I mean, these 2 seem to rise to the top because of the amount clearly and the amount of debate we've heard.
I don't
You might
have
be the
any.
only 2.
Does anyone else? That's a good question to ask, though. Okay.
I'd be okay leaving it off for this year. Next year,
Depending on the size of the grant
Yeah.
and whatever else.
yeah,
Fair.
but I think that's a great question.
It is a good question. That would be good to follow up with council. We can get advice on that as well. All right. So we have the motions with the one minor change in adding the 0. We have a motion. We've had discussion. Is there any further discussion? All those in,
I just,
yep.
sorry, we're not actually voting on the numbers, we're just voting on the content, so I'm comfortable voting on this. Is anybody in objection to that?
No, actually, your part is not on this. So interestingly, we don't have the full CIP in this motion. Is that correct?
That's right, but question 5 is on the PAC project.
Oh, question 5 is on
That's what I
the
thought he
back.
was referring to, yeah.
Okay. Why don't can we have a motion on questions 1 through 4, please?
So moved. That is, I move to approve the text of questions 1 through 4 as read by my colleague.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. The motion carries unanimously. Can I have a motion to approve question 5?
I move to approve question 5 as read by Mr. Art.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any abstentions?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have 5 approved, 1 abstention. Motion carries in that order. Okay, so are we done?
Perhaps a little out of order, but I guess you could technically close the public hearing at this point.
Okay, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Are there any other motions for the good of the order at this point?
I think we're all set. Now the Board of Selectmen gets to do that all over again in 2 days. So.
Okay, is it possible that we are done? Let me just check my agenda. Okay, we have budgets, we have note. Is there anything else for the good of the order at this point? Let me just congratulate members of this board, thank staff and all those who have worked on this budget, members of the public, especially those who have stayed the full time. Thank you for staying. Members of the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education.
Friendly amendment to your list to add the chairman of this committee.
No, thank you, though. All right, so thank you to everyone who did that, and with that, may I have a motion to adjourn? I'll get you after the meeting.
I'm
Any second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.